Hi everybody, welcome to this evening's webinar. My name is Emily and I'm from the Fertility Network team. So I'd like to start off this webinar with a big thank you to Fertility Network's partners Ferring, who have helped us to host another webinar with Stuart Lavery. So Stuart is a consulting gynaecologist at Hammersmith Hospital and also a senior lecturer at Imperial College in London. And today he's going to discuss ways that you can improve your chances of conceiving naturally. If you have any questions during the presentation, just pop them into the Q&A section, which you should find below. If you just hover at the bottom of the screen, leave them there. I'll be in the background. I'll check these over. And once Stuart's finished his presentation, we'll then go through as many questions as we can. So Stuart, if you're ready, I'll pass over to you.
Thank you very much, Emily. I hope everybody can see my screen. It's always a great pleasure to give these talks on behalf of FN UK and our sponsor Ferring. And I very much hope that we'll spend the next 40 to 45 minutes hopefully imparting some helpful information to you in what can be sometimes quite a confusing and sometimes conflicting field. So it's pretty broad, and I hope to cover quite a lot of ground in the next 45 minutes. And hope to be able to help answer some questions at the end of the presentation. So essentially what we're going to talk about today is, what are my chances of things happening naturally? And can I do anything to improve my chances of conceiving naturally? We're going to start off just talking about the basic statistics, because I think your understanding of realistic expectation is really, really important. Because we need to know, should we be running to the fertility clinic if we've been trying to conceive for 3 months? Should we be going there after 12 months? Or if we wait 24 months, have we left it too late? So a really good understanding of what your personal chances are of conceiving naturally really does figure into when you should access treatment, and also your level of anxiety and patience is really important. So we're going to spend a few minutes talking about that. We're then going to talk about the issues that influence natural fertility. So how frequently should we be having sex? When should we be having sex? Should we be doing sex a particular way? What about my age? How important is that? I'm really stressed out. Is that stopping me getting pregnant naturally? So I hope to cover all of these issues, and then I hope to leave you with some take-home messages at the end of the presentation. So right from the very beginning, I want to acknowledge that you will be getting advice from everyone. Friends, family, everybody will be giving you input. And you know, sometimes it's kind of easy to accept that and to understand it, and sometimes it can just be a little bit confusing. So I want to reassure you that over the next 40 minutes, every piece of advice I'm going to give you is actually based on evidence. It's based on the UK guidelines from the National Institute of Clinical Excellence, and it's also based on the American guidelines from the American Society of Reproductive Medicine. So you can rely, hopefully, on what we're about to tell you over the next 45 minutes. I can also reassure you, you will not hear from me old wives' tales, traditional practice, paternalistic advice, or Harley Street commercial witchcraft. Okay, and there's a lot of that kind of advice available all over the internet. So we're going to stick to what we know works. Okay, so let's talk about these basic statistics, because this will underpin how we manage our expectation. It can be quite staggering to understand that if you are 19 years old and you are having sex all the time, your chance of getting pregnant in one cycle is only between 18 and 20%. So most people need a little bit of luck, and most people need a little bit of time. So please don't dream of running to the doctor or the fertility clinic if you've only tried for 1 or 2 months. It's definitely worthwhile giving things a bit longer. But the fundamental underlying principle is getting pregnant can be harder than you think. But over time, it will improve. So within 6 months, 70% of couples that are having regular frequent intercourse will have conceived. And within 12 months, 85% of people will have had a pregnancy. If we carry on for 2 years, 90% of couples will have achieved a pregnancy. So this does take time, and it's usually worthwhile having some patience. And I think it's quite difficult. And I think because the world we live in today teaches us that everything can be ordered straight away. And if you want something, if you do it right, it will happen. But actually, when it comes to biology, that's not always the case. And even if everything is absolutely okay with your anatomy and your physiology, it can be normal for this to take some time. But it can be really difficult to accept that when you're trying hard every month and getting that monthly reminder with your period to tell you that it hasn't worked. So it's not an easy thing to do, but it's probably quite an important thing to understand. So if we accept that it's only going to happen at a frequency of 18 to 20% per month, what are the things we can do to make sure that we're squeezing out every single percentage point from that month or 6 months or 12 months of trying? So these are all the issues that do influence natural fertility. And we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about each one of these. Probably the most important thing is frequency of intercourse. And I've no doubt that you will have had friends who have said to you, you want to be having sex all the time. I have no doubt you'll have other friends who say, oh no, don't do that. Rather have longer times of no ejaculation and then let your husband have a really big ejaculation at the time that you are trying. Other people will say, well, actually you should be doing it every alternate day. So the facts behind this are that men who have frequent ejaculation, it does not decrease their chance of fertility. So if you two are in the mood to be having sex every day or more than once a day, and you've got the energy and the inclination for it, it's fine. It will not reduce your chances of success. Indeed, with abstinence, if we wait too long, and when I say too long, that's probably more than about 5 days, that tends to decrease sperm quality. So the overall advice, based on thousands and thousands of men, are that it's the minimum effective frequency is at least every alternate day. Okay? Indeed, in men with slightly reduced parameters, there's a little bit of evidence to suggest that they should do it every day. Now, people can get confused because when you go in for a sperm test, they will say to you in the lab, avoid an ejaculation for 2 days. But many people then think, oh, that must therefore give me my best chance of having the best sperm test. It doesn't. Just reducing, or just by having that time of 2 days, all that does is it standardizes the analysis for the lab. It does not mean that you get your best sperm result avoiding ejaculation for 48 hours. So it's really important because, this can become a stressful experience anyway, having sex all the time, trying to achieve a pregnancy. And if you then superimpose on that some Excel spreadsheet timetable that says you can only have sex on these days, all that's going to do is increase the stress on you and on your relationship. Okay, so we try and reduce the strict frequency, and we try and say, be doing things at least every alternate day around the time of ovulation, if you can. Couples who have sex 3 times a week are 3 times more likely than couples who are having intercourse once a week. And it's hard. Most of us have got busy lives. We can work long hours. Sometimes we come home from work and having sex might be the last thing on your mind. So it is quite difficult to keep going at a regular frequency. You don't necessarily have to do it the whole way through the month. You can focus just around the peri-ovulatory period. But then we need to be sure when that time of ovulation is, and I'll say a little bit more about that later. The take-home message is that to be maximally efficient, which is kind of unromantic and a bit scheduled, but to be maximum efficient, sexual intercourse every 1 to 2 days, okay? It's only a little bit better than actually sex every 2 or 3 days. So try not to get stressed about precise frequency and ultimately develop your own optimal frequency based on your own lifestyle and your own relationship. So what about the timing of intercourse? To be having sex every alternate day throughout the whole month might be easy if we're all 19, but as we get a little bit older, it's maybe not that easy. And so therefore, can we focus around the time of ovulation? So the fertile window in women can really vary, but in most women, it lasts for about 6 days. Most of that is around the fact that sperm lasts for several days. We think the womb lining's receptivity might actually be for a much narrower window. If you look at studies that have been done of thousands of women trying, or thousands of couples trying naturally, the maximally efficient time to have intercourse to achieve a pregnancy is within the 3 days prior to ovulation. But because sometimes a woman's ovulation will vary slightly, often we'll say don't stop at ovulation, but keep going for a day or two after ovulation. So it's quite important for us to understand when is ovulation actually going to take place. And it will vary depending on how long your menstrual cycle is. So for most women, the length of time between ovulation and when they have their period is a relatively constant 14 days with very little variation. But where the variation really can be important is the length of time for when the period starts to when you actually ovulate. And therefore, you need to work out your individual optimum timing for ovulation. So for example, in women who have a short cycle length of around about 23 days, their most fertile time is actually between cycle day 5 and day 8, if cycle day 1 is the first day of your period. And then you can see from this graph, the longer your menstrual cycle becomes, so for example, women who have a 35-day cycle, their most fertile time will be between day 19 and day 22. Now, there are lots of apps out there that will tell you this information. There are calendars available, and there are all sorts of different tracking devices. But these are the rough times that you should have in your head, and you relate it to the length of your menstrual cycle. Sorry about this. That's much better. Okay, so these are some of the ways that you can monitor your ovulation. And they come in all shapes and sizes and all fabulous types of technology. Most women who have regular menstrual cycles are ovulating regularly, but it will be at slightly different times of that menstrual cycle, as we've just described. There are some signs that women have been using for thousands of years to track this. And these include looking at the change in your cervical mucus. Does your libido change? Your mood? Some women will have abdominal discomfort or sometimes even pain. Now, these signs, they do work, but they're not enormously reliable. And most people believe that women can predict ovulation from looking at the signs within their body, only with about a 50% chance of accuracy, which obviously is the same as flipping a coin. So these signs are helpful, but maybe don't rely on them. The things that are available, that again have been around for several years, would be urine LH kits. So these are the kits that everybody buys down the pharmacy, and you wee on these kits and they will either have a smiley face or they will have a stripy line depending on the type of kit. Now, it's really important to understand that the kit is not telling you that you are ovulating. It's telling you that your body is producing an LH surge, which should lead to ovulation about 36 hours later. So always be aware of that. But actually, ovulation can take any time within 48 hours of a positive surge. And about 7% of these kits will give a false positive. Baseline body temperature charting, something that can be very popular with people. They download these charts from the internet. They look at their cervical mucus. Both of those things have about an equal frequency. There are some very sophisticated technologies out there that are available. There are temperature probes that sit within the vagina. There are iPhone apps that are available. I mean, these are some images here of the iPhone and the iPhone app, and the very happy couple with a baby holding the iPhone as if it had a really significant role in their baby's existence. What's really kind of interesting to understand is most of these things work, but they work because they are sophisticated placebos. And what I mean by that is that they change your behavior. If you are spending £150 on urine kits, or you are looking at your iPhone app every day, or you've got something even more sophisticated like the £400 temperature charts that are then downloaded to the computer via a USB stick, because you're spending money and because you are very involved in your care, you will have loads of sex at the right time. But it's the loads of sex at the right time that's getting you pregnant. It's not the app. It's not the calendar. It's not the temperature chart. It's not your acupuncturist. It's the fact that all of those things are influencing your behavior. So you are getting pregnant the old-fashioned way. So it's quite important to look at these things and to make sure you're not, paying a mortgage worth of money on all of these kits, because most of them are just subtly changing behavior. And really, if you just had a calendar and you managed to stay motivated long enough, you may not need these things. Okay, what about sexual practices? I've lost count of the number of people who come in and say, doctor, should I lie down after I've had sex? Should I put my feet up against the wall? Should I put a pillow under my bottom? I'm worried all the sperm is leaking out. There is no evidence that laying flat does any good at all. There's no evidence that having sex in a particular position makes any difference at all. So if you want to lie down afterwards, that's fine. If you want to get up and make a cup of tea, that's fine as well. It doesn't make any difference. Most sperm does dribble out of the vagina. Most sperm doesn't make it through the cervix and into your womb. So don't be anxious if you're experiencing this. Artificial lubricants, you do have to be careful with. Many lubricants that are available are actually spermicidal. Okay, they're actually used as contraceptives. So do make sure, if you are using a lubricant, make sure that it's been approved and that it is safe for sperm. Other people will ask questions around female orgasm and about whether that's important in terms of trying to achieve a pregnancy. And there was one study which did show that if the woman had an orgasm during intercourse, that she did have an increased chance of getting pregnant. But when that study was very closely looked at, the real reason was because women who had lots of orgasms had more sex. And it was the frequency of the sex that gave more pregnancies rather than the fact that they had an orgasm in itself. Okay, I think everybody who's listening to this will be aware that age is important. And obviously age is the one thing we can't do anything about. But it is important both for the male and the female, possibly more sensitive on the female side of things. We're born with all the eggs we ever have, and we actually start losing eggs before we're born. Many people think that we just lose one egg a month when we ovulate. But if we're born with 450,000 eggs, we wouldn't actually become menopausal until we were age 400. So the reality is we're actually losing about 100 eggs each month. And even if we're on the pill and we're not ovulating, many people say, I've been on the pill for 10 years, I've been storing up all my eggs. The bad news is even when we're on the pill, we're losing that 100 eggs a month. What is important to understand is that everybody's an individual and each person is actually more than just their date of birth. And there are new tests available now which allow us to determine potentially your biological ovarian age rather than your chronological age. And there are some women who will have more eggs than others, even though they're the same age. So sometimes it is worthwhile finding out your own individual ovarian reserve, depending on what's happening. The older we get, the higher the chance of there being something else going on from a gynecological perspective, such as fibroids or endometriosis. These are all more common as we get older. So getting pregnant naturally tends to become less successful as we get older. It tends to happen relatively slowly, but there are some tipping points. Now, again, this is population data that shows that female fertility naturally falls sharply at age 38. But you don't go from everything being fine at 37 years and 11 months, having your 38th birthday, and then everything goes wrong. This is a slow, gradual decline in chances. And certainly, even between age 25 and 35, there is a significant reduction. If we look at women age 40 and over, then that definition of being infertile, which means no pregnancy within 12 months of actively trying, even in women who have got kids and everything is fine, 60% of 40-year-olds will need to try for more than a year. Now, there are about 850,000 pregnancies in a year in the UK, and about 4,500 women over the age of 40 are getting pregnant with their own eggs. And even over the age of 50, there is a tiny number of women getting pregnant with their own eggs. But these numbers are tiny, and we can't rely on them. Age is important in men, okay? I don't think most men realize that, because most men just carry on, and they see these great images of people like Des O'Connor here up on the screen, Charlie Chaplin, Pablo Picasso, Donald Trump, people all having babies in their 70s or late 60s. And so men tend to think time doesn't affect me. But there is an impact of time on the male side. Its main impact is frequency of intercourse. So only a third of 40-year-old men will actually get their partners pregnant within 6 months compared to much younger men. So that's because older men have less sex. Also, sperm quality tends to fall probably beginning around about age 45, but certainly from age 50, the quality of sperm that's ejaculated is also reduced. Okay, what about alcohol? Alcohol is pretty controversial, okay? There is no doubt that once you are pregnant, you should stop drinking. But most of the studies that have looked at alcohol habits of people trying to conceive have actually found that couples who drink a small amount of alcohol actually get pregnant quicker than couples who drink no alcohol. Okay. Now, people have said, "Oh, is that just because they lose all their inhibitions? They have a lot to drink and they have loads more sex." It's not that. Those studies are actually controlled for frequency of intercourse. So it's okay to have a glass of wine if you enjoy it. Please don't remove all of the nice pleasures in your life in the hope that total abstinence is going to improve your chances. It simply is not true. There's almost a fertility police out there that seem to want to take away all the nice things in your life, whereas the evidence shows with alcohol, it's absolutely fine to drink between 1 and 2 units of alcohol once or twice a week. And that will give you a normal chance of conceiving. As so much in our reproductive field, there's an unfairness between men and women, because men can get away with drinking between 3 and 4 units a day without it impacting on their chances of fathering a pregnancy. So it's unfair, but this is what the evidence shows. So don't let people tell you you have to give up all alcohol. Interestingly, in this particular study of 29,000 women, so big data from Scandinavia, drinking red wine was the most successful alcohol to drink in terms of achieving a pregnancy. So again, the take-home message, 1 to 2 units once or twice a week is absolutely fine. What about smoking? So the news on smoking is not so favorable. It shows that if you are a regular smoker, you will compromise both on the quality of your eggs and on the quantity of your eggs. You're likely to enter menopause a few years earlier. And not just will your eggs be affected, it also increases your risk of miscarriage. So even when you are pregnant, your risks are still higher. Smoking impacts egg quality and sperm quality, okay? So if the two of you are trying, the two of you have got to give up, okay? There's no real any way around that. Don't reduce, don't cut the number, just give up, okay? The evidence here is so strong that in fact the NHS will not fund you for fertility treatment if you are smoking. The e-cigarette story is a bit more interesting, and that's because it's much newer, and I think the evidence is still evolving. Most doctors quite like e-cigarettes because it helps get you off normal cigarettes. So I think as a general principle, my advice would be cut out the e-cigarettes as well. But if it's a choice between smoking or going on to e-cigarettes, probably go on to e-cigarettes. And hopefully that can then help and assist you in giving up completely. Caffeine is also interesting. So again, people will tell you, gosh, not only have you got to cut out your alcohol, you can't go down to Costa Coffee and get that nice cup of coffee that keeps you going every morning. And really, the evidence is only if you are a really serious coffee addict that it impairs fertility or increases miscarriage. And this is if you're drinking more than 3 to 5 cups per day. So if you're on about 1 cup of caffeine a day, again, it's okay. Some people believe that caffeine is just in coffee and not in tea. Unfortunately, caffeine is in tea as well. If you can get yourself onto caffeine-free products of coffee or tea, that's absolutely fine. You can drink as much as you need. But again, it's kind of all about moderation when we're trying naturally. Okay, what about weight? Weight is important, and it's at the extremes of weight. So if we are too thin or if we are too fat. And it's probably about more than just our weight. It's probably more about our body fat content. And we need some fat content to allow us to have normal reproductive function. So we see problems both in professional athletes that are too underweight, and we see it in women that are overweight. So the magic numbers really are to try and keep your BMI, which is the calculation of your height and weight, together between 19 and 30. That sort of optimizes your chances. Male BMI also does impact on sperm quality as well, usually when the BMI is above 30. It can be really difficult to lose weight, even if there is a powerful motivation of trying to have a baby. If you look at all the studies done on fertility and weight and what actually works, 3 things work. Number 1, diet is more important than exercise. Number 2, you are more likely to lose weight successfully if you do it as part of a group than if you're by yourself. And then 3, if you link funding to weight loss, it's also a powerful incentive. So it's not easy. And particularly in some women, for example, with polycystic ovaries, who have different levels of insulin resistance, it's doubly cruel because in women like that, it's much harder for them to lose weight even with the same calorific intake and exercise as a person who doesn't have polycystic ovaries. The only form of optimism to actually keep you going are that if you are able to lose about 10% of your body weight, most women with PCO will start to ovulate spontaneously and not need to access the fertility clinic. Okay, again, I've lost count of the number of diet books there are out there that tell you you can eat your way pregnant. And do you know what? There are all these things here. Oysters, ginger. Last year, I think it was Brazil nuts. I think the year before, it was pineapples. There's even garlic, although how garlic encourages you to have lots more sex with each other, I have no idea. But be careful with diet, because it's actually your weight that's important. If you are of normal weight, you don't have to modify your diet significantly. And actually, diet usually is about either trying to put on weight or trying to lose weight. And the most effective diets tend to be high protein, calorie restricted diets. But be careful spending all of your money on all of these diet books. And I apologize if there are any authors in the audience who will tell you that if you eat their diet book, or if you read their diet book, they will get you pregnant. Again, you'll read the diet book, you'll take it seriously, have loads of sex at the right time, and it's one of those sophisticated placebos that will modify your behavior. Okay. So again, this just reiterates the point I've made. Most diets do not work when they are put into prospective randomized controlled trials. They work by getting you involved and empowered and having lots of sex at the right time. Okay, this is one interesting study, specifically looking at women that were overweight. And it did show in 18,000 women, so a big study, that actually if you did these things, avoiding trans fats, eating lots of vegetable protein, avoiding high carbohydrates, that you did lose weight and you did improve your chances of conceiving naturally. So if we are overweight, it's important. It's better to try and shift some weight. And usually the magic number is to try and lose at least 10% of your body mass. What about tight underwear? Okay, I'm sure everybody's husband looks like David Beckham here in his tight underwear. There is a link between scrotal temperature, elevated scrotal temperature, and reduced sperm quality. But there's no evidence that having cold baths, buying looser underwear makes any difference to that. So if your husband thinks he looks great in his tight underwear, it's probably okay to let him carry on working. There's no evidence that changing underwear makes any difference. What about occupation? There are some interesting jobs that probably are associated with reduced chances of getting pregnant naturally. The ones that are well known about are chemical industry, submariners because of proximity to radiation, printers because of proximity to chemicals, and cyclists and canoeists at a professional level, okay? So if your male partner likes going out at the weekend and having a bit of a cycle or a canoe, that's okay, all right? It's men that are training professionally in these sports where they're in the saddle 7 days a week for many hours. In those scenarios, we will sometimes see changes in sperm function, but not people who do this as a hobby. Chefs have been a quite interesting one, and there have been quite a few famous chefs who have written books on getting pregnant. And the theory was, am I close to these hot ovens? Do they raise my scrotal temperature? The evidence to actually support it is relatively weak. The biggest thing with occupation is just being busy and stressed. So, for example, in my Harley Street practice, I get bankers and management consultants through the door. And for them, it's all about, I just don't get home in time, or I'm so exhausted when I get home, I don't have time to have lots of sex at the right time. So it's just being busy as opposed to the specific nature of their job. What about stress? I think, trying for a baby, and if it's not happening naturally after a couple of months, it is undoubtedly stressful. And it changes what is normally a relatively spontaneous, fun activity. It medicalizes it. People come in with Excel spreadsheets of how frequently they're having sex. The evidence does suggest that stress can impact on your chance of conceiving naturally. But you'll usually know. And the reason is because stress affects the hypothalamus in the brain, which disrupts the hormonal signals to the pituitary gland and your ovary, and your periods either stop or become more irregular. And we see this both in, for example, women who are sent to prison. Their periods stop or they become more irregular, or just medical students having their final exams, all their periods go out of the window. So if your periods are very irregular, sometimes that can be stress related. It has a much bigger impact indirectly on libido and frequency of sex. So people that are stressed have lower libidos and have less frequent intercourse. So the reality is, if you're having regular periods and the two of you are having loads of sex at the right time, it probably doesn't matter how stressed you are. And be careful of giving up jobs. So, I've had people who have said, look, I love my job, but I'm really stressed, but I want to get a baby more, and I'm going to sacrifice my job. Be cautious in doing that, because you don't want to end up in a job that you no longer love and pregnancy is still not happening. So be careful of that. It's also true that fertility treatments such as IVF are stressful. In fact, stress is the commonest reason why people stop IVF, not because they run out of money or the chances of success become low, it's because it's such a stressful experience. Most of the IVF evidence suggests that stress is less important than getting pregnant naturally, because the lab and the hormone treatments actually take over many of the processes that stress would normally interrupt. So it's almost okay to be stressed during your IVF cycle. It's unlikely to make a significant difference. But doing it naturally, be careful if it is having a significant impact on your body. Okay, so in summary, these are the important issues. If we are too overweight, that will impact on our chances of conceiving, and losing that weight will significantly improve our chances of it working. If we are underweight, it's the same. It will take 4 times longer to get pregnant if we are underweight. What about smoking? A 60% increased chance of being infertile associated with smoking. we've got to take that seriously. Significant amounts of alcohol and caffeine, again, they will impact. Lower levels, no impact at all. Illicit drugs, so recreational drugs, marijuana, cocaine, these things are not really well understood about why they impact on fertility, but they do seem to, and indeed they can increase your relative risk by 70%. Toxins and solvents, again, those things that are quite rare in the printing industry or in the chemical industry, they too can have a significant impact. But that's it, okay? Outside of these relatively small amount of issues, things are okay to do. Okay, so my take-home messages from today are, number one, understand the statistics of natural conception and understand how they apply to you, okay? So if you have just been trying for 3 months, it's probably worthwhile giving it a little bit longer, unless you have something in your history that's of a concern. Equally, if we've been trying for 25, if we're 25 years old and we've been trying for 12 months, it might be worthwhile giving it a little bit longer. But if you're 36 and you've been trying for 12 months, it's probably worthwhile seeking diagnosis and treatment sooner rather than later. Be aware of what your fertile window is, and be aware that it's probably spread over a few days, mainly determined by how long sperm survives within the womb. And for most couples, it'll be around 5 to 6 days. You definitely need to have as much sex as you can, but discover what the optimum frequency for you two is. There's no point in having too little, and there's also no point in having too much that then becomes so stressful that you can't keep things going. Be careful of reading or listening to the fertility police that want to stop all of the nice things in your life. I have no doubt that the people who write these books or give out these messages have the best of intentions because they really want you to get pregnant. But the evidence, honestly, is that it's okay to have a little bit of alcohol and it's okay to have a little bit of caffeine. When it comes to diet, your weight or your body fat content is more important than any specific supplements that you may be taking. Don't worry that you have to lie down after sex unless you don't want to. LH predictor kits, so these are the urine kits, they can be helpful for couples whose periods might be irregular or couples who don't have a lot of sex. If your periods are regular and you're having a lot of sex, save your money. You don't have to buy these kits. Be aware of the sophisticated placebos that are available out there. They are fabulous. They will quote you on the box, 85% of our patients were pregnant within 12 months. But of course, 85% of patients that went down to McDonald's and had a cheeseburger were also pregnant within 12 months. So all of these things are kind of sophisticated placebos that modify behavior. Age is important. It's the elephant in the room. There's no way of getting away from it. It takes longer for us to conceive the older we get. But women have babies all the way through their 30s, all the way through their 40s, but it just takes a bit longer and you need a bit more luck. Avoid smoking, high levels of alcohol and caffeine, recreational drugs are a no-no, and if you use lubricants, be careful to use the right lubricant. So when should we start to get anxious, and when should we move from being reassured, we just need a bit more time, to hang on a minute, should we seek help? So if there are no risk factors, so you're fit, young, healthy, having loads of sex, you're under 35, I would probably be trying naturally for 12 months before you started to check things out. If there are no risk factors and you're more than 35, maybe a little bit earlier, and we will sometimes investigate couples after 6 months. Many of them will be fine and will say, just give it a bit longer, but probably worthwhile doing tests a little bit earlier if we're age 36 and above. If there are risk factors, then age is irrelevant. You should get tested straight away. So these would be things like in a man, if he had an undescended testicle as a child. In a woman, if she had an episode of pelvic inflammatory disease or a ruptured appendix or a ruptured ovarian cyst as a teenager. Again, get checked out straight away. Choose a good clinic, okay? And good clinics are not just clinics that have these amazing fertility results, but they're clinics that can see you quickly, they're geographically located close to you for easy, and you get a good feeling of comfort and confidence because they will look after you as a human being and not just a number that they will crunch and move you into IVF the day after you've come to be seen in the clinic. So choose the right treatment for you, and be understanding of all the different types of treatment that might be available and sensible for you. These are some websites that you may find helpful. The HFEA website is really good if you're thinking about going through IVF. The British Fertility Society and the American societies, which are SART and the ASRM, I think are very good. They have patient-specific sites, so the language that's used is more patient-friendly than perhaps some of the more technical sites, and Wellbeing of Women is often very useful to access as well, which is also a British website. Thank you so much for listening, and I wish you, all of you, the very best of luck along your fertility journey. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Stuart, for that really clear and informative presentation. We do have a few questions in the Q&A box. I'll actually start off with one that was sent before the webinar as well. So I think there's a little bit of overlap with what you already covered, particularly to do with ovulation, but we'll just see if there's anything else you might have to add to this one. What is the best way to use ovulation sticks with the timing of intercourse?
Okay, so really you want to be having sex before your ovulation sticks turns positive, okay? Most people will have about 36 hours between the ovulation stick becoming positive and when they ovulate. But it's really important to understand that the surge of LH hormone is like a bell shape. And so when you get a positive smiley face, you're never 100% sure, are you on the graph going up, so ovulation may be 50 hours away, or are you on the graph coming down and ovulation may only be 12 hours away? So be careful with the sticks. Use a calendar first. Have a rough idea when you're ovulating. And my advice would be actually start to have frequent intercourse a day or two before you're expecting the sticks to become positive, and then continue with the frequency of at least every alternate day. And I would usually do that for a day or two after ovulation as well. So for about 6 to 7 days, be having frequent sex, with the ovulation probably towards the end of that period.
Okay, thank you. And again, two quite similar questions. If your period is irregular by a few days a month, and if your cycle is consistent, but there's a large gap between both cycles, how to know when you're ovulating?
Okay, so that I would do by understanding that the constant timeline is the time between when you ovulate and when your period becomes. So for example, if you've got a 35-day cycle, okay, you're going to be ovulating right about day 21. Okay, now you can use some LH kits if you want to confirm that, but just using a calendar in terms of timing intercourse is probably be enough. So the magic number is I ovulate 14 days before my period is due. Now, if you have a 28-day cycle, that will be on day 14 of your cycle, but it will move, but that 14 days in most women is pretty constant.
Okay, and for branded advanced ovulation kit that detects LH and E2, is there any reason to believe that this is more accurate than LH alone?
No, I think there's quite limited evidence to show that, unless you have a low LH surge in itself. So estradiol, it's not as accurate a hormone as LH. So it's kind of a guide, but I would never make any big decisions on it. And I would never put any emphasis on it bringing a lot of extra clarity or specificity compared to just LH alone.
Thank you. Do you think that home semen analysis kits are accurate enough to be worth bothering with?
Oh, tough question. So if you'd have asked me that question 5 years ago, I would have said, no, complete waste of time, don't bother. But they're getting a bit better, okay? The really important thing to understand, though, with sperm analysis is how variable they can be, okay? So there's an amazing study done on sperm donors. So these are guys who've got 7 or 8 children through sperm donation. And their semen analyses were sent off to laboratories once a month for 12 months under false names. And on average, for 2 months out of 12, these sperm donors were diagnosed as being infertile. So you can translate that to the kits at home. Many, many times you will get a funny result but it will just be because the sperm that month is not fabulous. So I think they are helpful, but I think if you've been trying to conceive for more than between 6 and 12 months and nothing's happening, I'd probably get a proper test done, because the proper test will analyze more parameters than the home test. So I think the way I would use it would be, if the sperm test shows an abnormality, go in and get a proper one checked out. If the home sperm test is normal, it might be worthwhile trying for a few months before you seek a full test.
Thank you. We have another question here from someone who unfortunately has been trying for 3 years and has had 2 miscarriages, which I'm very sorry to hear. All of their tests and investigations have come back normal. So in your professional opinion, do you think that they still have a chance of conceiving naturally, or would you say that IVF is a stronger hope at this point?
No, I would say that history is still consistent with getting pregnant naturally, okay? What might be worthwhile evaluating is to try and find out, is it a fertility issue, is it a miscarriage issue, or is it both? Okay, so sometimes it can be worthwhile evaluating fertility tests and miscarriage tests. Normally, we only recommend that after 3 miscarriages, but some women will want it after 2 miscarriages. IVF is one of the ways forward, but not necessarily the only way forward. So I think my advice would be, if you've been through that, you're at the stage where you're thinking, I'm not quite sure what's going to happen here. My advice would be, don't give up naturally, keep going, but at the same time, maybe consider getting some advice around further investigation and possibly intervention. But don't give up.
Can you get tests to find out your ovarian age on the NHS, and what would you need to ask for?
So it kind of depends. You usually just wanting to know is not really an indication for the NHS to do this test for you. If, however, you've been trying and nothing's been happening, then these tests would be a routine part of NHS provision. But most women who just want to get a feel for what my ovarian reserve is usually end up having to go privately. And there are 2 tests that most private clinics will offer. One will be an AMH, and the other will be an ultrasound scan to measure antral follicles. Now, it's really, really important, because some women go in, they do these tests, they get a low AMH, and they panic. And they think, oh my God, my ovarian reserve is low, I must be booked in for IVF tomorrow. That's not the case. AMH has no prediction on your chance of getting pregnant naturally. So women with low AMHs will get pregnant naturally all the time. Very important. AMHs are really helpful when it comes to looking at fertility treatment, trying to design optimum fertility treatment, and to give you an expectation of success with your fertility treatment. They're much less helpful when it comes to saying, will you get pregnant naturally?
Okay. The next question is from someone who has luteal phase defect. They're interested in knowing if there's anything that they can look into before looking at more invasive procedures. Okay,
so the answer to this is maybe. Okay, up till about 15 years ago, luteal phase defect was taken very, very seriously, and lots of women were put on luteal phase support in terms of progesterone, with the idea it would support the womb lining during the luteal phase and give the embryo a chance to latch on. For the last 10 years, people have thought luteal phase defect doesn't exist, and the things that we've been doing have been purely homeopathic. But there has been a resurgence of interest in progesterone, and luteal phase defect seems to be coming back on the agenda. And certainly in terms of early pregnancy loss, progesterone support seems to be hugely helpful these days. And so therefore, could luteal phase support, which would be the earliest time you can give this progesterone, it is coming back into fashion. It is being taken more seriously. There are a couple of important things to remember. If you are going to take progesterone, do not take it before ovulation, before the luteal phase starts. Otherwise, the progesterone will actually act as a contraceptive. And also make sure you haven't got something pathological like a small polyp in the womb that will be causing the spotting prior to your period. So definitely get a scan done, definitely get your progesterone measured, and possibly consider luteal phase support, but definitely worthwhile discussing with your gynecologist.
Thank you. And is there anything that someone can do naturally to get pregnant with blocked fallopian tubes?
So if the tubes are blocked, then the chances of conceiving naturally are extremely remote. I mean, I have seen miracles where we've told women that your tubes are blocked and they come back pregnant a few months later. So we would never, this is quite a humbling profession to be in. Sometimes nature finds a way. But most women with blocked tubes cannot get pregnant naturally. And they therefore need, to be sure as possible, is the tube really, really blocked? Because sometimes you can have a false positive on a scan or an x-ray where the tube goes into spasm. The dye doesn't go down the tube, but it's just spasm. And a few hours later, the tube opens up. So be sure about your diagnosis. Is it accurate? And if it is accurate, probably consider doing something to either open your tubes, and there are some new ways of doing that using guide wires and not having to have surgery, or consider bypassing your tubes with a treatment such as IVF. But take tubal blockage seriously.
The next question is from someone who hopes that this is just another old wives' tale. Are baths detrimental at any stage in the cycle?
It's an old wives' tale. Have as many baths as you want and enjoy them.
Okay. Do you have any advice for a couple who have been trying for a couple of years and have low libido and also struggles to sustain an erection? Any advice for them?
Yes. So there are kind of almost two strategic approaches that you can have. One is you can consider trying to improve libido and trying to improve quality of erections. And that's a long haul and it's difficult, but it is successful. And most of that is through counseling, cognitive behavioral therapy. So literally trying to find out, is there an underlying cause for this, talking about it and addressing it. That works, but it takes a long time. The other short-term fix is to medicalize the issue. And this can be done either by taking certain medications which can improve libido, well-known medications that can improve erections, or going straight into some form of gentle fertility treatment such as insemination. So you need to figure out what's right for you. Is for you as a couple to take that long-term psychological approach to try and improve those two issues, or is it right for you as a couple to take a more short-term solution to medicalize it with medication or fertility treatment? Both are valid. You go with the one that feels right for you.
Thank you. So earlier in your presentation, you mentioned fibroids. Can they influence your chances of conceiving naturally? And do you have any advice on this?
So the answer is that fibroids can be important, but not in everyone. So about 50% of all women will have fibroids at some stage of their life. So they're really common. The fibroids that tend to impact on fertility are the particular type of fibroids called submucosal, which means that they occur in the cavity of the womb where the embryo is trying to stick. Fibroids on the outside of the womb, called subserosal, they can be ignored. Even if they're large, you can ignore them. They have no impact on fertility. And fibroids that are in the middle of the womb, what's called intramural, they can sometimes have an effect if they're large. So the important thing is to find out what type of fibroids have I got, where are they, how big are they, and can they influence my fertility? So that really needs to be individualized.
Okay. Have you any advice or anything to say on the impact of exercise, in particular cardio exercises?
Yeah, so most exercise is a good thing, and we would be very supportive. We think that it has benefits in maintaining a good BMI, and we also think it has benefits psychologically in terms of frequency of intercourse. There is only one study that took place in IVF patients who were very, very serious gym goers. They were going to gym every day during their IVF with high impact exercises. And in those patients, they had a slightly lower IVF outcome than patients who didn't go to the gym as regularly. And the reasoning is thought to be dehydration and elevated core body temperature. So if the level of exercise that you're doing is either elevating your core body temperature, and boy, that's got to be some quite severe exercise, or allowing you to get dehydrated, that's probably not a good idea. But our advice is we encourage people to exercise, but keep a normal temperature and stay well hydrated. We think it's a good thing.
Thank you. So unfortunately, as we are running out of time, I think we only have more room for one more question. So I would advise maybe for the rest of the questions, if they could be emailed to us and we can answer them after the session, if that's okay with you, Stuart.
Yes, of course.
Okay, so the last question is just, what's your advice for those with polycystic ovaries in terms of monitoring ovulation in order to have sex at the correct time?
So it really depends whether you are ovulating regularly with PCO or not. So some women will have polycystic ovaries, but they will be ovulatory. In those women, it's the same advice as everybody else. Look at your cycle, look at 14 days prior to your period. That's your maximum time of ovulation, and have loads of sex for about a week around that time. For women with polycystic ovaries whose ovulation is either irregular or doesn't happen at all, those women, it's worthwhile seeking treatment early on. Now, that treatment can sometimes just be weight loss, but it's really difficult to lose weight when you've got PCO, or it can be relatively gentle forms of treatment, such as Clomid. Okay, so for most women with polycystic ovaries who are very irregular with ovulation or not having ovulation, that can be addressed very quickly, very low tech, very low side effects by taking a tablet such as Clomid, costs £8.50, and that is very, very effective in helping if it's not happening naturally.
Thank you so much, and I'm so sorry to everyone who submitted a question we didn't have time to answer. If you just email me at emily@fertilitynetworkuk.org, then we'll make sure that they get answered as soon as possible. So thank you so much, Stuart, for presenting to us, and thank you also to everyone for joining us this evening. I'm sure that, I hope that people will find some value to take home from this. And yes, stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night.